Can you hear me, Chester? All right. Many of you haven't heard of the name Harry Emerson Fosdick. Well, if you have, raise your hand. Nah, I didn't think so. He's a preacher a long time ago. And I read this sermon he wrote, or part of it. So I thought I'd pass it on to you. And again, he preached this a long time ago. So the name of the sermon was Parking on Another Man's Nickel. Obviously, long time ago. Where can you park today on a nickel? Nowhere. But the idea that he had was sound. You come to a parking place that has a meter, and someone else has already inserted a coin. Okay, maybe today it's $1. I don't know what an hour parking time costs anymore, but it's not a nickel. Someone else has paid time and it's still on the meter. They didn't use it all. It must be your lucky day. You pull in and park on somebody else's nickel, quarter, dollar, whatever. So Fosdick went on to say that some of us go all through life parking on someone else's nickel. Particularly, this is true of us who are born in a free land. Someone's already paid in blood, sweat, and tears for our parking place. The temptation is to enjoy our good fortune without taking responsibility for those who come after us. Many of us are giving in to the temptation to enjoy the benefits of citizenry while avoiding the headaches of civic responsibility. Is our community a better community because we live in it? Is our city a better city because we live in it? Is our state a better state because we live in it? Is our nation a better nation because we live in it? Is our PTA stronger because we have a child in school? Can the United Way or Red Cross or Wounded Warriors or whatever on the list count on our support? These are not glamorous questions. These are simply the nuts and bolts of citizenship. Are you parking on someone else's nickel to enjoy the fruit of freedom without tending to the tree of liberty? Is anyone in the future going to park on your nickel? Just a thought as we go in to celebrate our nation's Independence Day. And this day commemorates the day that 13 original colonies joined together to declare their independence from Great Britain. In fact, the first time we were ever referred to as the United States of America was in the Declaration of Independence, which was accepted by the leadership of 13 colonies on July the 4th, 1776. July the 3rd, we were a collection of colonies. July the 4th, we were the United States of America. That's why we call it the fourth the birthday of our nation. Hope you take some time to recognize and give thanks to God for the blessings we've enjoyed as a nation. Past nickels, future nickels. Of course, no holiday would be as much fun without a blooper here and there. A little boy who was asked to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and he got all flustered and he blurted out, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one naked individual with liberty and justice for all." Well, one naked individual may be too much liberty for some of us, but I'm sure the little man, his heart was in the right place. even though his tongue let him down. Perhaps you will take some time today to consider what virtues make our nation strong and what obstacles make us weak and what part of each of us can play in building a nation that will last another 245 years. Of course, there are some well-meaning people who believe that pointing out our weaknesses in our republic is unpatriotic. They are like the business owner who would not allow his wife or any of his employees to point out any of his shortcomings. And so he went to a formal company banquet where he was asked to say a few words. There he stood before a large group of his employees, their spouses, for 30 minutes with a large piece of lettuce stuck firmly between his two front teeth. Everyone saw it, but none of them had the courage to draw it to his attention. Sometimes the person who points out our weaknesses to us is our most valuable friend. Today's lesson comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 through 10. Now, prior to 7 is Paul talking about going to heaven, that he was caught up. He thought either in body or in spirit, and he went to heaven. So after he come back, apparently, verses 7 through 10 is what he says. And so we're going to look at that because 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 is about weakness, personal weakness. Well, okay, I'll add a little bit of collective weakness thrown in. After all, it is the 4th of July and a birthday of our nation. We all have them. It doesn't matter what image we present to the world. It doesn't matter how much money we have in the bank. It doesn't matter what degree or title we have at work. We all have weaknesses. Problem is that we live in a prosperous, image-driven society. Nobody puts their weaknesses on Instagram or Snapchat. We only put our best, most airbrushed image out there. The last thing we want our friends to see is our flaws. What's the picture that all these movie stars and people that want to have their attention? What's the? It's a headshot of somebody. What's that called? I can't remember now. It's real touched up type picture, but there's a name for it, and I couldn't think of it. But anyway, that's what we want to put forward. What is it? Could be, but photoshopped. Okay, we're getting in the weeds now. All right. Some of our weaknesses are physical. Some are mental and some are moral. Some of those weaknesses have to do with our work and some of our family life and some with our relationship with Christ. Some of us, for example, have short tempers. Others of us struggle with depression. Others of us struggle with anxiety. Some of us are too proud. Others are too lack of backbone. They give up too quick. But all of us are weak in some area of our life. Paul had his weakness. One in particular caused him much headache and heartache. We don't know for certain what it was. He called it thorn in the flesh. Some have suggested that Paul suffered from epileptic seizures. So he was in good company. Two of the most powerful men who ever lived, Julius Caesar and Napoleon, both were epileptics, as has been many other great individuals throughout history. In Paul's day, there wasn't any Dilantin or Keppra to control seizures. If that was his thorn, he was stuck with it. Paul prayed that God would deliver him from his affliction. 3 times he beseeched God about this matter, but God's answer was the same to him each time. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Notice those final words. My power is made perfect in weakness. In other words, God seemed to be saying to Paul, trust me. I will take care of you, and I can use your weakness to demonstrate my power. Someone once asked Abraham Lincoln why he wouldn't replace a cabinet member who constantly opposed him. Lincoln told the story about a farmer who was trying to plow with an old, decrepit horse. Lincoln noticed that on the flank of the animal was a big thistle that stuck in the animal's hair. Lincoln started to pull it off, and the farmer says, don't remove that thistle, Abe. If it wasn't for the sticker, this old horse wouldn't move an inch. Each time I tap that sticker with my whip, the old boy keeps on moving, thinking he's getting away from what's sticking him. Today in our country, people are getting poked by a sticker. Higher gas price, higher food prices, illegal aliens flooding our border, crime rates soaring, inflation on the horizon, lying politics and corrupt media, or maybe it's the reverse, corrupt politicians and lying media, but it doesn't really matter because they're both the same. And we're the ones they're sticking it to. So what can we do? Move on like the old horse and think you're getting away from it, from being stuck? Or like Paul, turn to God and trust him. Trust God to turn our affliction into strength, strength to stand up and say, that's enough. Don't hit my thorn with that stick in again. For it is God who made this nation great. And it is God who can take that greatness away. But for me and my family, we will trust in God, for in God we trust. Let's get back to the individual. We can learn from Paul's experience. Paul not only learned to accept this thorn in the flesh, he even began to boast about his weakness in order to show the power of Christ. There's a great lesson in that. Our weakness, whatever it may be, can become our strength if we will commit it to God. First of all, if we commit it to God, it causes us to grow. When we can grow beyond fear, when we can grow beyond self-centeredness and beyond immaturity, then we can reflect God's glory. God's glory may shimmer in our strengths, but it shines in our weaknesses. When others see us grow in patience and wisdom and courage and faith through our heartaches, that's when God's glory shines a convicting light in our hearts and minds of those around us. That's what causes them to say, I see God in you. I want what you have. Last time I heard somebody say, I want what you have, it was the IRS. Some of us will remember this tennis star, superstar by the name of Arthur Ashe. A much respected man. Ashe, while still at the height of his career, contracted AIDS from a blood transfusion during heart surgery. Fellow athletes admired Ashe for his skill and class on the court. But the world came to admire him even more for his courage in facing this tragic illness, which led to his untimely death. In an interview, Arthur Ashe commented, if I ask why me about my troubles, I would have to ask, why me about my blessings? Think about that. Why did I get to win Wimbledon, Ash said. Why did I get to marry a beautiful, gifted woman and have a wonderful child? What an incredible perspective on life. If I ask why me about my troubles, I would have to ask why me about my blessings. Arthur Ashe understood that God uses both our joys and our sorrows to grow us into people that reflect His glory, His character, and His priorities. As someone has said, our disappointments are His appointments. By God's grace, painful experiences or situations can help us grow. It's only human to pray for God to fix our troubles. Paul had done that more than once. 3 times he pleaded with God to take it away from him. Pleading being that he begged God to take it away from him. And what do you do when God doesn't fix your most grievous problems? That's the time when you pray for God to reveal Himself in your troubles. But He said to me, Paul said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. When we give up on our strength and rely totally on God to help us endure our troubles, that's the point when we discover the true nature of God's character and the true faithfulness of God's promises. Have you reached that point? In your life, have you come to that idea that when troubles come and they don't go, but they come and stay? Have you asked God to show Himself in your troubles? Because if He does, you're going to shine. We plead to God to change our circumstances. We plead to God to change our circumstances in our country. Does it seem like God is silent in our struggles? And instead of asking God to fix your circumstances, ask God to reveal Himself in your circumstances and admit that the only way you'll get there is through His strength, through God's strength. And look for opportunities to grow in courage and compassion and wisdom. Our weaknesses can become strengths if they help us grow. Our country will not be healed unless we are healed individually. The secular world is in a war with God. Only by the strength provided by God can we as individuals stand in the midst of this battle. Witnesses can also be witnessing, being a weakness can become a strength. It can make us more determined to give our best in all circumstances. Remember, your life is not just about you. If you believe in God as your creator, then you know that God made you for the greater purpose than your own happiness and comfort. When people look at you, at your character, at your choices, at your priorities, and your actions, they should see the power and truth and love and wisdom of God in you. Other people should feel some impact from your life. They should be inspired or comforted or challenged or changed because of their contact with you. So how you choose to respond to your weakness matters. Bethany Noel Murray is an artist in Boston. Her paintings look like fantasies of magical forests filled with light and colors and strange shapes. Fans of her work describe it as looking at a beautiful landscape through a kaleidoscope. Now, Susan and I looked at some of these pictures last night, some of these paintings. They were interesting. They were on the internet. And it's unique what she does. Not because of her artistic talent, but because of her circumstance. Bethany has a secret. The secret to Bethany's unique and beautiful paintings lie in the pain that she suffers. Bethany has suffered from chronic migraines for 20 years. In addition to the intense pain of the headaches, she also experiences sensitivity to light and sound and distortions in her vision during a migraine. Rather than give up her art and go to bed, Murray turns her pain into beauty. As she says, "My paintings have been proof to myself of what I experienced during an attack, during that attack, and despite the pain, I have made the choice to see the good, the weird, and the beautiful." God may shimmer in our strengths, but He shines in our weaknesses. If we let our weakness lead us to grow, and it causes us to give our best effort in all circumstances. You see, our weaknesses can also become a strength if it helps us change our life's course. Sometimes what seems to be weakness is only a signal that you're pursuing the wrong trail. One of the most revealing lines in literature appears in the opening paragraph of Winnie the Pooh. Here, Edward Bear, coming down the stairs, bumps his head on the stair steps all the way down. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming down the stairs. But sometimes he feels there's really another way. If he could only stop bumping his head for a moment, he could think of it. If you're bumping your head coming down the stairs, maybe it's time you stop for a moment and think if there's another way it might be done. Sometimes our so-called weaknesses are simply warning signs to us that we're on the wrong road. Since this is a day that we celebrate independence, there's a story about one of the best known figures in the battle for independence. He was a man who needed to begin again. His name was Patrick Henry. Even though Patrick Henry has been revered for most of history as a patriot and orator, for years of his life, Patrick Henry was a miserable failure. He and his brother opened a store, but it failed. Next, Patrick's father-in-law set him up in farming. Patrick was given 300 acres, a house, and 6 slaves. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? Patrick Henry was a slave owner. He's best known for "Give me liberty or give me death." He's known for that speech. But somehow, he did not think that the men and women who worked on his farm might have the same sentiments. In spite of his father-in-law's generosity, however, Patrick Henry also failed as a farmer. Finally, on the advice of some friends, Patrick turned to law. He was a natural persuader and a captivating orator. And as a lawyer, Patrick was an instant success. Further, his was exactly the voice that was needed to launch the colonies toward the break from England. Give me liberty or give me death. It was a perfect sentiment for the time. Though he shared a glaring and regrettable weaknesses, Patrick Henry was not a failure. He was simply in the wrong field for much of his life. And most important of all, our weaknesses may become strengths if it reminds us of our dependence on God. Can you hear Paul boasting, saying, "Look at me. I once persecuted the church. Look at me, a man who has a battle that he's fighting, a humiliating affliction, this thorn in the flesh. Yet Christ has used me to plant churches all over the known world." Paul was a man of tremendous intellect. He was also a man of unquestionable persuasive powers. Perhaps if it had not been for this thorn in his flesh, he might have leaned upon his ability rather than the power of God working through him. And you and I would have never heard of Paul. His weakness became his strength. His scar became his star. His hurt became a halo. And the same thing can happen to us. If our weakness helps us grow, if our weakness makes us more determined to succeed, if our weakness causes us to stand for truth, and if our weakness causes us to rely on God, we will succeed. There was a young woman whose life shone through her weakness. Her name was Kristen Fervovich. And she was a Canadian singer and songwriter who was known for her faith in God and her infectious joy. In June 2011, Kristen was diagnosed with cancer for a second time. She was 27 years old. This time the doctor said it's inoperable. Kristen admits that she cried and prayed and pleaded. But she also made up her mind to face every day with joy. Everyone who met her was inspired by the joy they saw in her. One day during her prayer time, Kristen said to God, "I don't understand, but I trust you. Your ways and thoughts are higher than mine. Just speak to me, Father. Bring me comfort." And then she flipped her Bible open, and there on the page she read these words from Isaiah 55. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace." Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. In October 2013, Kristen died, 30 years old, went to God. In her last conversation with her husband, Mike, before she died, Kristen whispered a song of praise to him. Took all of her strength to whisper these words to her husband. But it was a song of joy. Kristen knew that God's grace was sufficient for her and that God's power is made perfect in weakness. That's how she could face her weakness with joy. God has the power, the authority, and the mercy to answer every prayer and take away every weakness. He could make our life as smooth as a velvet blanket. Why doesn't he? Because our life is meant to be a reflection of God's power and love. And God's power is made perfect in weakness. We may have faith to say with Paul, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Allow God to strengthen you through your weaknesses, for your country will need you in the coming days. Happy 4th of July. May it be very thoughtful 4th for you. And all God's people said. Now, generally, when we finish up, I don't like to say anything else, just let you walk away with these thoughts. But I make an exception today. I want to tell you about what next week is. And I'll tell it to you in a little story. A fellow had been stranded on a desert island for 20 years. Finally, he saw a modern cruise ship, which had anchored unusually close to the shore in order to permit a little snorkeling. Catching someone's attention, the man was taken aboard the cruise ship. After getting himself cleaned up and dressed, he was invited to the captain's table for dinner. So asked the captain, "How did you manage to survive by yourself all these years?" The castaway pointed at the porthole and said, "By the grace of God." You see those 3 huts out there on the beach? Captain said, "Yeah, I see them. You must spend a lot of time in them." "That's right," said the beach bum. In the middle hut I live. I cook my fish, sleep in a hammock that I made myself. The hut on the right is where I go to church. Never miss a Sunday. Celebrate Christmas and Easter. Give myself communion once a month. And even hold a revival every year. That's why I've been able to survive so long, by attending church regularly. Amazing, said the captain. So what about the hut on the left? Oh, that's where I used to go to church. Now that's the question I have for you today. And that's what is coming in the next weeks. Where did you used to go to church? The answer to the question is not the obvious. Where did you used to go to church? Think about that. And all God's people said amen 2 times.